Salting America. After the Revolutionary War, America began to grow, and transporting salt to the new territories became a problem. So a system of canals was built, starting with the Erie Canal, which connected Lake Erie with the Hudson River. Now there was a waterway to move salt up and down the Hudson either to the Atlantic Ocean or the Great Lakes in the rapidly growing Midwest. Meatpacking became a major industry in the Midwest, and like the fisheries of the East Coast, it required huge quantities of salt. American roads. If you study a road map of anywhere in North America, it often looks as though there were no plan to the placement of towns and roads. That is because many roads are simply widened trails originally cut by animals looking for salt. People followed these trails and decided the places that had salt at the end of trails were good locations to start villages. A wide road near Lake Erie was made by Buffalo, and the salt lick found at the end of it became the city of Buffalo, New York. Salt and science. As modern science changed the way people lived, salt's role began to change too. In the early 19th century, a Frenchman named Nicolas Appert discovered that food could be preserved in airtight jars that were heated. This led to canning, which greatly decreased the market for salted fish and vegetables. 100 years later, Clarence Birdseye discovered how to preserve food by rapid freezing and started a frozen food company. At the same time, scientists had learned that salt could be broken down into the elements it was made from, sodium and chlorine. Both of these had many industrial uses. New salt-based industries were launched, including bleach, pharmaceuticals, new explosives, and bicarbonate of soda, which is used to make soft drinks. Ketchup. In the 17th and 18th centuries, a sauce made from salted anchovies became extremely popular. In England, it was known as ketchup or ketchup. The name came from an Indonesian fish called kicap ikan. By the 19th century, there were many different kinds of ketchup. Some had fish or mushrooms or other ingredients, but every recipe contained salt. Tomato ketchup was an American idea. The first published recipe for tomato ketchup was written in 1812 by a prominent Philadelphia doctor named James Mease, who referred to tomatoes by an older name, love apples. Slice the apples thin and over each layer sprinkle a little salt. Cover them, let them lie 24 hours, then beat them well and simmer them half an hour in a bell-metal kettle. Add mace and allspice. When cold, add 2 cloves of raw shallots cut small and half a gill of brandy to each bottle, which must be corked tight and kept in a cool place. The Salt March. While salt's economic uses changed with time, salt's symbolic power held strong. Perhaps the most famous story of salt's power was Gandhi's Salt March. For centuries, the British had ruled India. In 1930, the Indian National Congress met to discuss ways to gain independence. A small man named Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, who was known by the nickname Mahatma, which means the great soul, believed that way to popularize their cause was through salt. At first, this seemed like a peculiar idea, but Gandhi explained that the average Indian was angry because the British had banned the local manufacture of salt. They forced Indians to buy salt from Liverpool at very high prices. Not only had this left the people in salt-producing areas without a means to earn a living, but also made salt expensive. At first, this seemed like a peculiar idea, but Gandhi explained that the average Indian was angry because the British had banned the local manufacture of salt. They forced Indians to buy salt from Liverpool at very high prices. Not only had this left the people in salt-producing areas without a means to earn a living, but it also made salt expensive. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi announced to Indian, British, and American newspapers that he intended to walk 240 miles to Dandi on the Arabian Sea, where he would defy British law by making salt. He started with 78 followers, but by the time he reached the Arabian Sea 25 days later, thousands had joined the march, including journalists from around the world. With his spindly bare legs, Gandhi walked along the beach where a thick crust of salt had evaporated in the sun and picked up a piece. Someone shouted, "Hail, Deliverer!" Gandhi had made salt in defiance of British law, and people celebrated throughout India. They, too, gathered salt along India's coastline and demonstrated it in the cities. It was the beginning of a movement which 17 years later led to Indian independence. How salt lost its glitter. For centuries, geologists were fascinated by what were known as salt domes. While most underground salt is mined from large, shallow beds spread over a wide area, occasionally salt becomes compressed into columns that go several miles deep into the earth. The top of the dome then pushes right up to the surface, forming a slightly rounded hill with a thin layer of topsoil. Until the 20th century, nobody knew how deep these domes went because drills could not go very far into the earth. In 1859, Edwin Drake was able to drill 69.5 feet on the edge of a salt dome in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Even more significantly, though geologists had said he would fail, Drake discovered oil in the dome. Then, in 1901, Patillo Higgins and Anthony Lucas again ignored the geologists and drilled into the edge of a salt dome in Texas known as Spindletop. A tall black fountain of oil erupted. Scientists learned that the salt crystals in salt domes join together to form an impenetrable glass-like wall. When other organic material gets trapped next to a dome, it slowly decomposes over millions of years and eventually turns into oil and gas. After Spindletop, no one ever looked at salt domes or drilling the same way again. Drills and rigs became the tools of the oil industry. New drilling technology made it possible to understand what was really under the Earth's surface. As soon as it was discovered that salt, far from being rare, is distributed in huge beds throughout the planet. What were once thought to be isolated salt areas were actually parts of enormous underground salt deposits that stretch for thousands of miles. In the United States, one bed covers the entire Great Lakes region. Another bed begins in eastern France and goes through Germany, Austria, and southern Poland. And so, today, when we put salt on our food, we barely give it a second thought. We live in a time when salt is taken for granted. It's common and expensive and hardly worth fighting over. But the next time you pick up a salt shaker, remember that not only do you need salt to live, you are holding rocks that shape the history of the world. Here are timelines that show you the history of salt through the centuries.